We're here this afternoon with Stephen King, author of When the Money Runs Out, The End of Western Affluence. Thank you for doing this interview with us today.
It's an
and
absolute
welcome.
Pleasure. Thank you.
We have a few questions for you. First question is, what is the general premise of the book? What do you hope to accomplish with it?
The general premise is that the West has had an extraordinary period over the last 50 years of very, very rapid growth by its own historic standards, a kind of golden age for growth. That golden age appears to have become somewhat tarnished over the last few years, not just at the start of the financial crisis, but even before the financial crisis. There's evidence that perhaps the structural growth rate of the Western economies was beginning to slow down. So my question is, if we really are seeing this structural slowdown in economic growth, can we actually meet the promises we've made to ourselves during the good times, when we made promises based on the idea that the good times would continue to get better and better and better in the future? So effectively, you've got a gap that's opened up between political and financial hope and economic reality. And the question is, how do you close that gap?
You say that baby boomers have a misguided sense of entitlement and are unwilling to make sacrifices that would lead to growth, and that this may lead to intergenerational conflict. How can millennials create a movement to return to growth and create some wealth for their own children?
Well, this is a really tricky issue because if the gap has opened up between financial and political hope and economic reality, one way of closing the gap is to wave a magic wand and hope for a decent period of strong economic growth. The other way, of course, is to reduce all those financial and political hopes, which is where the challenge comes through currently. Always discussion about austerity. It's not just a short-term issue, it's an issue about how to make the numbers add up in the future when income is simply not high enough to support all these entitlements. What's happening at the moment tends to be that there's lots of support for pensions and healthcare, which of course matters a lot to people of a certain age, but less emphasis perhaps on education and infrastructure, which are the sorts of things that really matter for the younger generation. So I think there's a need in one sense for a kind of almost like a new social contract between the generations to make sure that the less plentiful youthful population is looked after to a significant degree. Because if they're not, then you end up with the risk of social and political upheaval. When you look at the very high levels of unemployment in countries like, say, Spain, but also the high levels of youth unemployment in the US, for example, these are really big challenges. I don't think you can solve them purely through some kind of demand stimulus policy, much more a bigger issue about how do you shift resources from the elderly to the young. And one easy way of doing this, of course, is to raise retirement age. Another way of doing it is to encourage more immigration of people of working age to actually shift the balance in the economy. These are all things that are possible to do, but they're all, of course, politically quite contentious.
In your book, you discuss Asia, but Latin America also went through some very tough economic times and reforms in the 80s and 90s. What is your outlook for the Latin American region in the medium term, given what is going on in the West today?
The first thing to note is that Latin America has done pretty well over the last 10 years during a period of Western economic stagnation. One of the main surprises in the global economy has been how the so-called emerging world has continued to grow very quickly, even as the developed world has hit this kind of economic brick wall. So what we've got is evidence, I would suggest, of some significant structural decoupling in the world economy. Now, I think for the future, what matters, I think, for Latin America is, in particular, trying to exploit opportunities that exist in what I'd call the Southern Silk Road, a series of south-south trading opportunities between Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. Because when you think about the world economy and how it's going to change in the future, it's going to be the opening up of those trade linkages and capital flow linkages, which really are still in their infancy compared to what we see today in the Western world. And if they can change, if they can open up, which requires a degree of political bravery on behalf of all the partners, whether it's in Asia or Latin America or elsewhere, if that can happen, you've got a much better chance of seeing sustained economic growth coming through in Latin America alongside other parts of the emerging world.
So you're hopeful about the Alliance for the Pacific that Mexico, Chile, Colombia, and Peru are working on today?
I think that relationship is very, very important, and I think it needs to be extended because I think the dynamism of the global economy will increasingly come from those parts of the world which are still at a middle income level or a lower income level, which have the opportunity to specialize, to trade with each other, to take advantage of the whole sort of comparative advantage arguments and actually begin to flourish more than we've seen already.
The title of your book, When Money Runs Out, is pretty compelling. Have you thought about the title of your next book?
I'm still busy with this book at the moment, just trying to make sure that people are aware it's out and so on. But I've written 2 books already. That was my second book. I wrote something called Losing Control, which was out 2 or 3 years ago. And I'm hopeful that the publishers will come back to me and say one day, how about a 3rd book? But we'll see.
Thank you for your time this afternoon. We really appreciate all of your comments.
Thank you.